Hello, it's Linda.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for testing.
Hello.
We'll get started in just a few minutes here now that one of our wonderful speakers is all ready to go. Hello, folks. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. There is a poll that we're asking folks to fill out while you're waiting. If you're using the webinar system, feel free to do that. And we'll get started in just a moment. All right. Welcome, everyone. We will go ahead and get started here. First of all, I just wanted to say welcome to everyone and thank you again for joining today's conversation on peer support, the bread and butter of IL, organized by April. This conversation is a partnership with the ILNet, a national training and technical assistance project for SILs and Silks, operated by ILRU in partnership with Nickel, April, and Utah State. The ILNet is supported by a grant from the U.S. Administration on Community Living. Grantees undertaking projects under government sponsorship are encouraged to express freely their findings and conclusions. Points of views or opinions do not therefore necessarily represent official administration for community living policy. For today's conversation, if you are using a phone line only or a phone line, you may press *# to enter our queue to speak and ask questions or join the conversation. For those of you using the webinar, you may also type your comments or questions in that chat box and we can voice them for you. If you're only participating via computer, you can click the little person with the right hand raised at the top of your screen to raise your hand, and then we can unmute your mic to speak. Please, as always, bear with me as I try to do the best I can with technical, but sometimes technology doesn't always work well. Today's captions for the call are being provided at the bottom of the webinar platform. If you're not using that webinar platform, we also have those available, and you can click the link on that first slide or that link that's provided in the invitation on the April website at www.april-rural.org under that IL Conversation tab, and that will pull up a whole screen of captioning. If you are having any trouble at all participating, you can always email me for immediate assistance, and that's Mary, M-A-R-Y, Olson, O-L-S-O-N, at mso.umt.edu. At any point, and I can help you the best that I can. And please, as always, remember to evaluate these conversations from the April website under that IL Conversation tab. Your feedback really does only make us stronger, and we just appreciate all of you guys participating today. And now, without further ado, the main event. We want to give a very warm welcome to today's hosts, Linda Pogue, the Disability Rights and IL Program Director, and Ken Mitchell, Assistant Director, both from Disability Link in Decatur, Georgia. Thank you so much for agreeing to lead this really important conversation for today's call. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to these speakers and let them introduce themselves a little and take us on this journey. So with that, Linda, take it away.
Hello. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone. I'm looking at my screen and it's saying that more than 100 people are participating in this. That's amazing, fantastic. Thank you all very much for your interest in peer support. My name is Linda Pogue, and I am indeed the Disability Rights and Independent Living Program Director here at Disability Link, serving the 12-county metro Atlanta area in Georgia. And here's Ken.
Hi, how you doing? This is Ken Mitchell, and I'm also looking at the screen, but unfortunately I don't see anything. I'm the Assistant Director here at Disability Link, and mostly I'm here to interpret Linda's English to Americanize it. But I'm looking forward for this conversation, and we hope to get a lot of participation.
I'm moving the slides. I am not sure that I can talk and move slides at the same time. So there is our contact information, should anybody be interested. And we'll return to that at the end of the presentation in case you want to capture it then. So this is a conversation about peer support, and we called it the bread and butter of independent living. And here this slide says the introduction. Bread and butter means an everyday or ordinary person or thing. Bread and butter is the basis of a sandwich. We put that together and say bread and butter or peer support is the everyday element or the basis of independent living centers. So would you agree with that? If you're somebody who likes to participate by speaking or chatting, please feel free to do that.
Linda, we do have some folks popping in saying, we love that idea. Yes, definitely.
Well, I have to say, this was Ken's idea. He does often think around food elements, so that's how we came up with bread and butter. That's great. Thank you for people for listening and paying attention. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And here I have 9 statements labeled, and we call it the Rules of Disability Links Peer Support Groups. In fact, this is the guidance that we offer people who are participating in our training for peer support. It's not completely relevant to a webinar, but I bet you get the flavor. It says, number 1, be on time. We have a lot to cover. Number 2, stick to the agenda. Obviously, that's a training agenda, but you're encouraged to ask questions. We certainly encourage you to ask questions. Number 3, breaks are built into the agenda, but as you're an adult and you're expected to know what you need to do, when people participate in our training, we always ask them to do what it is that they need to. And number 4, please respect one another at all times. Obviously, that's pretty basic in a Center for Independent Living. Number 5, we ask for no interruptions. And number 6, no monopolizing. So clearly, we want everybody to participate if it's a group. It doesn't really work if people don't participate. But being cognizant of the fact that everybody needs to have a go. Sometimes that means not saying something that you were going to say, so somebody else has the opportunity. Or sometimes it's pushing yourself to say something when you're a little anxious about talking out loud. Number 7, we encourage everybody to fully participate in our training, just as we encourage you to fully participate in this webinar. We certainly do understand if you don't want to participate. We always say in our trainings, we're going to encourage you, so don't be surprised if we say you feel like you can participate in something. And then finally, we ask people to remember that all discussion is confidential. Personal information shared by participants stays in the room. And again, relating that back to our training groups, people often share some great stories to help each other understand about living with a disability and peer support, how that fits in. So some of those things make sense in a webinar like this. Some of them don't. But again, we hope it makes you have a flavor of what it is that we like to do in our groups.
Yeah, this is Ken again. So one of the things that we also encourage is that, these are some rules that we kind of come out initially with. But we do encourage people to any other rules that you would like to add to that. And sometimes there's a specific thing that you like to add. For instance, I always say, if you would please, until I get to know your voices, would you say your name as you raise your hand or are talking. But I'm sure that you guys might have some other rules that or suggestions that you'd like to add, and if you do, this is a good time so we can put it on our list.
Somebody has actually included some of their rules in the chat. Maria Matzik is talking about these are our ground rules. What says in here stays in here. What's learned here leaves here. Respect, no judging, open-minded, stay positive, acknowledge frustrations, take time to process, listen, seek first to understand before being understood. All right, thank you,
good stuff.
Miss Maria, for sharing that. That's lovely.
Hello. I just wanted to remind folks, we're going to go ahead and open the floor so that it is open for requesting. So again, you can just press *# if you want to.
The floor mode is on. To request the floor, enter *, then #.
But take it away. Yeah.
So I'm moving on to the next slide. It says definitions of peer support. And these are definitions that we've taken from our peer support training. Peer supporters assist people with disabilities to lead a self-determined life through support and resources. Peer supporters are people with disabilities who have learned life strategies, how to be a self-advocate, and how to live independently. Peer supporters offer the benefit of their own experiences, passing along encouragement and support needed for others to construct their own advocacy and life strategies to bring about desired goals. Peer support has been there, done that. Peer support is one person with a disability supporting another person with a disability. Peer support is benefiting from the experiences of someone else, a trained peer supporter, in a similar situation. Peer support is assisting someone to live their own independent life. And finally on our list here it says, oh, I didn't move the slides, beg your pardon, folks. And finally on our list here it says, peer support is carefully listening and asking questions to help people with disabilities make our own decisions. I wonder if there's anybody who wants to add something else in terms of a definition of peer support.
Go ahead and press star pound if you're on the phone, or you can type it into your chat box.
This is Ken again, especially if you want to say peer support to me is...
Do you favor one of these definitions over another one, Ken?
I actually have somebody in the queue. Would you like me to open their line?
Oh,
Please.
that would be thrilling.
Go ahead, please. Oh,
Did we lose them?
go ahead, please. We might have. I apologize.
Okay. I just keep on moving, and then when somebody's ready, that's fine.
Perfect.
The next slide is titled, What is Peer Support? And again, we've taken this directly from our training curriculum. This is what we think of as peer support. An ideal peer supporter will have a purpose and a goal, assist others in building their own independent lives, work as a collaborator rather than an overseer, run on empathy, not sympathy, build circles of support around consumers, build bridges to people and resources within the community, involve friends and family, help people help themselves, keep all information about their peer confidential. Of course, we're happy to hear from anybody else. I'd like to draw attention to the number of times that help appears in this list of ideal peer support. We say we help people to help themselves. I think there's a danger that we can be too helpful sometimes. I think many of us who work in this field are people who want to be helpful and supportive of others. But we always have to remember in peer support, it's not about us, it's about our peer. So when we're doing the helping, it needs to be helping people to help themselves.
Trinette, go ahead, please. Did you have something to add? I wonder if it's my error. I think I have your line open.
Well,
While we're waiting for that, I do see here, Linda, that there are lots coming in down below. Run on empathy, not sympathy. That's good, Wanda says. And Maria says we need to be careful about codependency.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for the response. I like it. I appreciate it. So on the next slide, we have from our training what peer support is not. Peer support is not a gripe session about being an expert, a quick fix, progress takes time, being a rescuer or a mummy, professional counseling or therapy, or a substitute for meaningful social and other support services. Again, I'd be happy to hear from anybody who has anything to say about what we think peer support is not.
This is Ken. again, just a reminder that peer support can be difficult because, like Linda said earlier, that a lot of us is in this particular position because we want to, quote, help people. We want to, have people do better in their circumstances than where they are. So it's really difficult for us to not to quote help, but to support. And one of the discussions we always have in our peer support program is there a difference between support and help? And that usually comes up with a lot of conversations. And for all those people out there, that's something you might want to think about. Is there a difference between support and help?
I just wanted to add to that. This is Mary again. We've got some great things going on here. David says, helps to break that cycle of isolation and building a peer support network. And Minion says, never assume that people need help. We need to ask if they want any assistance. Christina adds that, she thinks we should address this, what it is and is not only in the SILs, but also with consumers. And finally, I apologize if I'm saying your names wrong, says peer support is not pushing one's ideals or successful treatment onto another peer. That's a good one. And Leah says peer support is not a time to fix ourselves while we're mentoring.
That's a good one.
Oh, these are great comments. Not to do things for people, but with people. Thank you very much, Leslie. Right, facilitators need to remember that's what they're doing, facilitating.
These are all so great. I'm thinking I might even pull these out and come up with a peer support is and is not tool from the conversation.
Very good things.
Awesome.
They're coming in so quickly, I can't read them before they're up. So there's a couple of questions about getting access to the slides, Mary. Is that something that you can answer, please?
Yes, thank you, Linda. The slides are actually available for download right now on the April website. And again, that's april-rural.org. I'm going to type it in there, and it's under the IL Conversation tab. And the entire recording of the webinar, including these wonderful chat comments, will also be up for download immediately following the conversation.
Lovely. Thank you for all those comments. I see a couple of people are mentioning about not trying to be a substitute for a meaningful social life or other support services. Right. Peer support is something that goes alongside these things in an attempt to help people build them if that's what they'd like to do.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
Would you mind if I asked one of the questions that seems to be coming up? Wanda asks, sometimes in these groups, there are all our consumers, sometimes these groups are all our consumers have, where there is interaction. So how do you bring them back to the topic if they rant?
Well, are we talking about one of us ranting?
Yeah.
Ken and I have been accused of that. Yes. You go ahead first.
Well, there's a couple of ways, and it really depends on the person that's ranting. Me, you have to be a little bit more direct, and then probably some other people can be more suggestive, I guess. And it really kind of depends on the person. But one of the things I know we often do in our particular class is that we might say something like, oh, that's your idea is valid or interesting or whatever it is, and we have some more ideas about that, and it's almost kind of indirectly shifting the topic to someone else, which will bring us back to the topic, or either we might bring up the topic itself, wherever we are in. And that relates to Ken Mitchell getting dinner tonight, how, and that's, just redirecting. Linda?
Yes, so it's possible, isn't it, to use some of the same techniques whether you're talking with one person or a group of people. And that is maybe to think back to the previous slide, is that an ideal peer support will have a purpose and a goal. So simply asking people, so where are we with achieving the goal, whatever that is, can be useful. I think everybody deserves an opportunity to rant from time to time, frankly. But yes, this is not what peer support, it's not just about griping, though many of us sometimes have to get things off our chests if we're going to move forward a little less burdened.
This is Ken again. Linda has a phrase that I know when I've been ranting a little bit too long, and it goes like this. It's been my experience that, and she'll say whatever the topic is.
Uh-huh. Thank you, Ken, for recognizing my skills. So people have got some ideas. David Nelson has said in that goal arena, having an agenda, if it's a group meeting, is an important aspect. Okay, so where am I? We'll move on to the next part, which is something that we hope you're going to participate. We've got a true and false quiz. This is from our training, but I think could be interesting. Let's see how it goes when we've got 139 people involved. So number one, true or false? If a peer is having difficulty with a task, you should immediately help them. True or false? Those of you who are connected through the webinar can actually vote on this. Oh, wow. It went, oh, lovely. I'm watching the numbers go up and down on my screen. So, right at the moment it says something like 93% say false and 7% say true. If a peer is having difficulty with a task, you should immediately help them. Well, this goes back to helping people help themselves aspect of peer support, does it not? Of course, it can sometimes make us feel very satisfied if we can jump in, help somebody, and show that we're capable of doing that. But clearly, that's not the goal of peer support, is it? It's about having people turn to their own skills and use them. So more often than not, we'd say, you're right, it's not about immediately helping. Now, there are going to be exceptions to this because it's life and life is complicated. There could be times when you do offer to help make something happen. But more often than not, peer supporters are not helping people, but helping people to help themselves.
This is Ken, and because I'm Ken, I always look for that area where, well, maybe it depends. And it may depend on what you think immediate is. Immediate may be prompt, it may be weeks, it may be whatever. So immediately it depends. And help also depends. Is help like doing it for them, or is help, hey, giving a suggestion? So I'm going to go help out that 7% that said that it's true. It depends. So it depends on what the task is and how you do help and when immediate is.
Mm-hmm. So in the chat you've got a combination of true and falses, people suggesting ask first, and people suggesting, well, ask the peer what the solution might be.
Awesome.
So we ended up, Ken, with 8.77%, which is 5 people, and 9.2%, which is 52 people. So the larger amount being that it's false.
Well, I've always been on the smaller side, always, so I'm okay with it.
All right. All right, thanks for joining in on that. What about the next question? If a peer has built defenses, one way to help is to tell them to get over it. True or false? We're 100% false with 13 people. Now we have a little bit of a difference.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We got one person saying true, 3 people saying true, 40 people saying not true. If a peer has built defenses, one way to help is to tell them to get over it. So 96%, overwhelming amount say yes, that's false. Right. I personally have never really responded very well to people telling me to get over whatever it is that I'm finding a barrier. So there might be times if I had a long-term relationship with somebody, I might say, I've noticed that, and then put in whatever it is, that this is a topic where you're always hesitant, or this is something that you might be concerned about. So there might be ways of saying, you say this thing an awful lot of times, isn't it time to move on, without saying it like that, and certainly not to people I don't have a very strong relationship with.
Well, this is Ken again, that voice in the background. I can think of an incident where I had a person who was blind, who was I was supporting them with their O&M skills. And one of the things they would not do, the lady, was go out in the rain. And I remember saying, she said, well, what about if I get wet? My answer was that, have you ever been wet before? And of course they said yes. And later on they confided in me to saying that was the most freeing part of their O&M training, that it was okay to get wet. And though I didn't say get over it, I just said, have you ever been wet before? And they said, well, yeah. And to this day they continue to thank me for that, which is weird because you would never, ever tell anybody, hey, just get over it.
This is Mary. Christina is wondering if you could clarify for us, when you say peer, is this a coworker, a consumer? Who exactly is a peer?
The answer is yes.
Thank you for asking that question. I probably should have said this early on, forgive me. The way I typically use phrases when I say peer supporter, I mean the person who has been trained and is providing the peer support service. Sometimes that is to a colleague, a coworker. Often it is to a consumer. Sometimes it is to family and friends in the world at large. It's kind of a philosophy of living, peer support. Not telling people what to do, encouraging people to take their own path.
So one of the things that, this is Ken again, one of the things that we suggested is that a peer and a peer supporter is a person with a disability supporting another person with a disability.
So peer supporter is a person doing the support typically, and a peer is the person who's receiving the peer support services. That's what I mean. Ken, can you clarify O&M skills, please?
Oh, sorry. Usually I say something like O&M is orientation and mobility. It's usually showing a person who is blind how to navigate, mostly with a white cane.
Thank you for asking the question. And yes, Christina, Ken's being facetious when he says yes. That's his style. But it means to people in general. We would start with specifically to consumers, because this is a service we offer at Centers for Independent Living, peer support. But we can also provide peer support to other folks who are not necessarily labeled consumers. Okay, so there's another question here on the true and false quiz. It is a peer supporter's job to keep up with the latest information or research about your peer's disability. True or false? And here come in the numbers. I'm watching them. This one's a little bit more evenly matched.
Uh-oh. I can't pick a side now?
So, it's actually 50-50 at this precise moment. Now it's changed. So it's erring on the side of false, but there's certainly no small amount of people who think it might be true. So that's most typical, I think, of when we have this conversation with other people, not on a webinar. It's a peer supporter's job to keep up with the latest information or research about a peer's disability. Well, I would put it something like this. I mean, as a peer supporter, you're probably interested in lots of different things, but you're not specifically responsible for finding out about somebody's particular disability, surely that's their responsibility if it's relevant. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't find out some information by asking it, or maybe even using the internet about particular labels, see if that can be helpful. But I would say that yes, it's not a peer supporter's job to keep up with the latest information about a particular disability. It is our job maybe to keep up with latest information about what's going on in the independent living world or what's going on in the disability rights world. Yes. I'm just looking at the screen.
This is Ken again. We were just, Linda and I were just talking about this a little bit, and one of the things that we were talking about, in order for our consumers or people to make have choices, is that they have to know the choices. So to give information is probably a good thing, but to know everything about a particular disability or area is probably impossible. So I would just be able to provide options.
So absolutely, I would agree with the folks who are on the chat line. Yes, it's not their job, but we could be a better person by knowing some of that information. You know, if we have current information, that can be really useful, but there's not enough time necessarily to keep up with all areas. And sometimes people don't have access maybe to the internet or whatever, so you're going to do a little research for people. That's not an unusual role for a peer supporter.
This is Mary. I do see one comment that Access Living is saying, it is important for us to know about communication for disabilities that you are unfamiliar about. And then Bob says, definitely, I think it's a case-by-case thing.
Right. I would agree with all that, if that doesn't sound too ambiguous of me, that there can be no harm in knowing this. I think the emphasis here is that it's not our particular job as a peer supporter in place of the peer themselves. Right. That's the emphasis. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. There's another question, if you'd like to do it. It is, when a peer supporter has established a relationship with a peer, the supporter's responses are less important. Would you agree with that?
Can you say that again?
I didn't say it very well, did I? When a peer supporter has an established relationship with a peer, the supporter's responses are less important. True or false? Well, we've got 100% false here. The numbers are increasing, but it's remaining 100%. Right. Things change when a relationship has some time behind it, but clearly as a peer supporter, we are always responsible for providing a very good peer support response to the issues and topics raised by our peers. Absolutely. I wouldn't expect anything else from a great bunch of peer supporters that are on this call.
I can't take the other side in this one, so I'm going to have to agree with the 100%.
Uh-huh. Thank you, everybody. And here's one last one. Categorizing peers is an effective way to organize the work of peer supporters. True or false? I'm watching the numbers. Heavily on the side of false, a little bit on the side of true. So I suppose this, to my mind, is something about labeling people. Does labeling make for effective peer support? Probably not, right? Probably not.
Maybe, Linda, if we talk a little about categorizing, it might help as far as like putting in people with different disabilities in certain groups is what you're saying?
Yes, right. Do we work with everybody with the same kind of label in the same way? No, we're Centers for Independent Living, so we rarely do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking a grip of your work and trying to make sense of it as a peer supporter, but that's not about the way we have our relationships. So somebody's pointed out that categorizing and labeling are different. Categorizing is not always negative, says Rary. Absolutely. There's always room for maneuver with these. So labeling, categorizing, I don't think those are very useful when you're in a peer support relationship. They might be in organizing your desk space, but not in your relationships. So somebody here, Pamela, said categorizing can help match a person with a similar disability. Doesn't necessarily mean it's labeling. Yeah, I hear what you say. When it comes to matching people with people in peer support, often that topic comes up. People should be matched with somebody with a similar disability, or maybe that's not been your experience. I would say that sometimes if you want to do a match based on experience or goals, that can be very useful. And sometimes matching is about something to do with something more mundane like geography, like people can actually reach one another. They're in a similar part of town. They have transportation to reach one another.
Sometimes, this is Ken again, and sometimes the disability itself is not as important, well, often, the disability is not as important as the situation. For instance, transportation. Because I happen to be blind, it doesn't mean that my issues with transportation is not the same as someone who uses a wheelchair. We both may have difficulties finding that particular accessible transportation or that path to travel, so we might both work together or support each other on transportation issues. The actual, let's say, ramp or maybe tactile dots, that part may be somewhat different, but the actual experience of transportation we both can share. We can both provide peer support to each other on accessible transportation.
Yeah, thanks for the people who are on the chat box. Leah's saying not categorizing, but being aware of each needs and match with the best mentor possible. And Rory's agreeing with that. Because people have the same disability doesn't mean they have the same experience, says Abby. Exactly. There's a number of factors that you might want to consider. I don't expect it in the independent living world, but in other parts of our community, people do match disabilities with each other, do they not? So we ended up with categorizing effective way to organize work as being 77.5% false and 22.4% true. Thank you, everybody, for joining in with that. I appreciate it. I really like your comments, too. I'm moving on to the next slide, if that's okay. This is labeled the who, what, where, when, how, and why of peer support. I think of this in my world as Ken's trademark. He's never happy, it seems to me, unless we've answered these questions: who, what, where, when, how, and why. So I started with who. All Disability Link staff, where Ken and I work, and our volunteers are trained peer supporters. We have a 3-day training, and we have quarterly follow-up meetings for trained peer supporters to support one another. And we would maintain that training is essential for meaningful peer support. And then I have how, and I have answered this with following the principles of independent living and peer support. That is, independent living means each of us is the expert in our own lives. And 2, there are already plenty of people who want to tell people with disabilities how to live our lives. So we don't need to train another bunch of people in peer support. That means that they're telling other people what to do. This is kind of the very opposite of that. In a world that likes to tell us what to do, this is the disability community supporting one another. Let me move on to the next slide.
This is Mary Linda, while you're doing that, just a couple of things. I just wanted to remind folks again, if you want us to open up your voice line, if you press *#, you can get in the queue. And then when I open your line, it will actually tell you your line has been open, you have the floor. But just make sure that you've unmuted your personal line at home. So if you're muting and unmuting at home as well, you have to unmute that. And while we're doing that, one quick question. Maria's wondering, did you develop the training?
There was a group of us in Georgia who developed this training. We were lucky enough to have the opportunity to glean the very best of peer support ideas and training from all over the state and put it together in this 3-day training. I hope that answers the question. So Ken and I were part of it, but not the only part of it. There were some greater minds than ours. Where was I?
What?
So easily distracted. What is peer support? Well, I think of peer support as a powerful tool for change in individual lives and in the community. For me, the message of independent living and the method of peer support empowers and enables us in the disability community to live the lives of our own choosing. If you haven't noticed already, I'm a big fan. And then the where and when. So I think peer support is a wonderfully flexible tool. It can be used in a wide range of locations and times at the mutual convenience of the peer supporter and peer. Now, obviously, we all have some constraints if we are working with or through a Center for Independent Living. But I encourage people to be as flexible and as imaginative as possible with peer support. I put this example here of Donnie's story, and in the slide at the end of this with resources on, it tells you how to connect with this. So I have a little clip from a DVD that's called Donnie's Story. What is it called? It's called A Life of Choices, Donnie's Story. And it's one of a series that was created to recognize people moving out of institutions and into the community, in particular with regards to finding employment. But the clip that we use in the training and then our follow-ups and so on often is a clip of Donnie, who is this young man who's lived in institutions, Central State Hospital, our largest and oldest institution here in Georgia. He lived there for many years, and his peer supporter is a woman called Darlene, who is interacting with Donnie in this story. And it takes place in a park, and they're strolling along, and then they find a bench to sit on together. Now, obviously, this was made for a video, so it was somewhat created, but it points out to us all that we don't have to be in an office, and we don't have to have a clipboard and a list and a notebook to provide good peer support. There is Donnie and Darlene in a park chatting away, and then at one point Darlene asks Donnie what his goals are, and he has trouble articulating them, and so she asks whether she could offer some ideas, and she used an example of her own goal, and then she talked about some of the similarities that they might have between them. She indeed had also lived in an institution for a long time and been prey to restraint and seclusion and some things like that. And when Donnie heard that, his demeanor changed, and he looks to Darlene with much more interest about this whole thing. She has something to offer. Anyway, the point to me is that we need to remember that we don't need to have to do peer support in a structured environment. In fact, the less structured it is, it often can lead to much more meaningful conversations, and that's what it's often about. And then the why, I have written that peer support is the antidote to the history of the disability community and the experience of disability. And for me, the why of peer support is the most important aspect. I mean, peer support can change lives and change attitudes and change outcomes for people with disabilities. It puts us as people with disabilities in charge, and it's all about people with disabilities and nothing about people without disabilities, what they do or don't do. It's putting us in the driver's seat, not a passenger seat. And to my mind, if you know why you're doing peer support, the how becomes a lot easier because you have this goal that you're striving for. I wonder if that makes sense to anybody. I see that Leslie's asking you about the 3-day training, and at the end of this I have some contact information if you're interested in talking with us about it. And Catherine's asking, do the staff who are doing the peer support have a disability? Yes. This is primarily about people with disabilities supporting other people with disabilities, using their experience and ideas and, well, their experience is best, to share with other people so that other people can benefit from what each of us has learned.
This is Ken. Sometimes there may be someone in the class that doesn't have a disability, and though they might not be a peer supporter, it does give some insight, I believe.
But primarily, yes, we're talking about people with disabilities who have received some training, this training or some other training about peer support, so that they can be effective peer supporters with people who have a disability and are working on goals. Leah says she likes the analogy of being in the driver's seat, not the passenger. Thank you for recognizing that. So are there any comments you'd like to make about my trying to answer the who, what, where, when, and how, and why of peer support? As I say, the why I think is the most important.
This is Mary, and again, I want to try these voice lines again. So if you want to voice, you can press *# and get in the queue, and hopefully we'll get that working. Otherwise, you can go ahead and type it in the chat boxes. I'll go ahead and say, Leah's mentioning that they really like that analogy of being in that driver's seat. And Bob says, I'm not disabled, but I have been dealing with this for over 10 years, and I've had many meaningful chats and shared things that my clients share with me. And in Missoula, they're wondering, how do we know peer support is beneficial? How do we know if it works?
Well, thank you for all those comments. I just wanted to say about Leah, I have another friend who likes to talk about being the CEO of your own company. That's her way of saying being in the driver's seat. And as regards to Bob says, yes, of course, in many ways, peer support is about treating anybody with respect in conversation. But in particular, obviously, because we're Centers for Independent Living run by and for people with disabilities. So we primarily are talking about people with disabilities being peer supporters to other people with disabilities. Good question. How do we know it's beneficial? How do we know it works? Well, there actually have been people more clever than I who have paid attention to how people reach goals with and without peer support. What I would say is that actually we're obliged to provide it. It's one of our core services. So that doesn't mean that it's not beneficial, but that we do need to provide it. And that we can ask our consumers how they feel about being provided peer support. See if it works for the people we're supporting.
This is Ken. Well, I know that often we ask, how do we know that that's working? So we try to think about what our particular goals are. If I was a person and I was trying to achieve a goal, one of the things here at Centers for Independent Living we will always say is that, it's funny when after people have taken the course, I always kind of mention to them, you've already been a peer supporter. We're just showing you the skills that you already have and maybe reinforcing some of the others. Because a peer supporter is, the way I always describe it, is like kind of like mentoring, but there's no mentor and mentee. The information flows both ways. And as in peer support, you'll find that as you are giving support, you often find that you wind up getting support as well. And that's one of the ways that you know that it's actually working, because you're giving and getting at the same time.
This is Mary, and to follow that up, folks are asking, at what point can we gauge, or excuse me, do you recommend a survey, they're wondering?
I wish I could say absolutely yes, I know. I can't think at this precise moment. I have to make a note and get back to you, as they say.
Great.
This is Ken.
DAC, I think that your computer mic should be live if you wanted to go ahead with your question, comment. Or maybe I'm just failing everywhere on the technology stuff. Or we're all learning together. Peer support is what I need.
That's right. There you go. There you go.
Well, we have found in similar situations, Mary, that we just move forward and it's worked out. So that's
Perfect.
my experience.
And David Nelson asks, as a disabled vet who works with other disabled vets, why is to share experiences and help each other with, it's the why. The why is sharing those experiences and helping each other with life struggles.
Yes, exactly. And I can't remember, it was one of the comments here, talked about maybe not always having this similar experience. I don't know, I just want to share this with people in case it's useful. So clearly I haven't had, every experience there is to have, but I've met and talked with a lot of people. So sometimes I don't speak from my own experience. I say, well, I know somebody else who was in a similar situation and they tried something. Maybe that might work for you. So it's possible to bring in a third party or more in terms of experiences. Does that make sense? And then Jessica here was asking about formal versus informal settings. As I say, I'm very keen on people to try some informal settings if possible, but sometimes life is just a bit too tricky. It doesn't work like that. So people do meet up at Centers for Independent Living and have conversations there. And that's fine, because obviously Centers for Independent Living are very warm and welcoming situations. But I encourage people to do conversations away from the office if at all possible. If transportation barriers and time barriers and all those things allow for it. And somebody's asking about if the differences between peer support one-on-one and in a group. I mean, yes, of course there are some differences and setting a group up, but I would say that the skills and techniques that you use are very similar. As a facilitator, you're going to encourage, obviously, everybody to participate in as much as they would like to, but you're still going to share information with one another and try to clarify things. I don't know if that's a very good answer.
I do have somebody in the phone line. Go ahead, please.
I would just like to say that I think peer support for me is like the backbone of all of the other services we provide. We develop a relationship which develops the trust, so we become better advocates. They trust us more if we do independent living skills. I just think it builds the whole basis for the relationship. That's just my thought.
Thank you. That's a great, I'm making a note of that. It's a lovely way of describing it, backbone, from which everything else happens. Yes, it's difficult to imagine everything else going on in the center without some good peer support. Thank you.
All right,
So,
Linda, that's everyone in the phone lines. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm glad that there was somebody who called in. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. I'm taking that as validation. But I also appreciate all the different chats that are coming in. Sorry, it takes me a little while to process what people are asking. Could you read some of those for us, please, Mary?
Absolutely. I just think, yeah, there's a bunch of different ones coming in here. One actually specifically, Jessica was wondering, can you speak to formal settings versus informal settings in peer support? For example, just arranging meetups in a park or social settings rather than sitting in a circle in a conference room.
This is Ken. When I think of formal settings, you set up your appointment, you kind of come into the office, you're just behind a desk perhaps, and it's more like an interview. And sometimes that'll work for different people, and then it can be a formal setting, and I'm just saying sometimes the atmosphere changes when you say, you know what, let's go outside. And you go outside and I don't know if you have a bench or somewhere near and you're sitting down, it becomes more of a conversation. And some of the barriers of this formal setting are broken, where it becomes, now I'm just chatting with someone. I'm just getting to know another person. And sometimes that changes the atmosphere or changes the discussion or the flow of the discussion. So we're not saying that formal settings are bad or anything like that, but we're saying that it might be good to change it. And there's various degrees of informal settings as well. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that when you take things away from an office, you are taking away maybe a potential assumption that people are going to get an office-like response. And of course, we do have offices as centers for independent living, but we're trying to do it in a non-typical human services way, are we not? So I always remember from classes years ago, people suggesting that when you're sitting next to each other, you have a more equal relationship than when you're sitting opposite each other. So park bench analogy works for that. Sitting next to one another can be very helpful to change it. I call it shaking up the energy about something. That's just my way of talking about it.
Great. And Vito is wondering, can you discuss any differences between peer support that's one-on-one versus in a group?
Yes, I tried to do that. I'm not sure I did a very good job of it. I would say that we're using the same skills, but in a group you then have to have the additional skills of facilitation and so on. But it's the same thing. It's about offering ideas, sharing experiences, thinking about possible resources that might be helpful. It's the same process, in my opinion.
Great. And then Chanel adds that at her center, we leave it up to our consumers. Winters are very harsh and long, so in the summer we encourage people to meet outside to get the fresh air and sun, but we're fortunate enough to have a pavilion down the hill from our office that is accessible and has plenty of space. And Pamela added to what you were just talking about, Linda, and she said, one-on-one and peer groups need to consider accommodations for people. For example, a person with a disability may not be comfortable in a group setting, so accommodations are important to consider too.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Very good point.
And there's a question from Missoula. How do we offer peer support without putting our own agenda in it? Good question.
Wow.
I think that's a fundamental thing. Thank you.
This is Ken. That's a difficult one. First of all, whoever said it, thank you for being aware of that, because we always have our own agenda, even if it's as much as I've got to finish this interview before my 2 o'clock appointment. So being, first of all, aware that we have our own stuff, and always trying to remember to turn it to the person you're talking to about what is it that they're asking, what is it that they want, and not to solve it for them, but to support them in their own answer. And keep that in mind. It's tough. That's the tough thing about IL, is giving support and not telling answers.
Yeah, don't knock people out of the driving seat, remember. I have to confess that, I always get flattered when people ask me my opinion on something, and so I'm so ready to tell people what my opinion is. It's just below the surface, so I need to be really careful about that. That's just about my ego, nothing about the situation for the person I'd like to provide peer support for. Sometimes I think of it as a relief having peer support, because we're not taking responsibility for people. Isn't that great in a world where people are always asking us to take responsibility for things? Our responsibility to that peer is to provide good peer support, the best we possibly can, and let go of what that outcome might be. Tricky, obviously. Always easier said than done, peer support. And that's why we have training opportunities and situations like this, so that we can think about how we can keep our own agenda away from good peer support. Humility, says Stephanie. Good point.
Stephanie also given you props for the title. She interpreted bread and butter as being one's basic monetary resource. Example, some people refer to a base, reliable source of income as their bread and butter. So I thought if peer support is the bread and butter of a SIL, that's just grand. Peer support both as special ongoing connections with individual and as a source of income. As one of the core SIL services, I guess it's both.
Yes, thank you for your insight, Stephanie. Appreciate it.
And then I'll just do a couple more here. Leslie's gives an example that they had lessons in grilling hamburgers and hot dogs, going on nature hikes, going to a coffee shop to job shadow. Yeah, I think that's great. And then I have a really tough question for you, and I think this could take the rest. I don't know. Chanel and Maria are both kind of wondering, so how do you take this peer group and transition it into an active advocacy army?
Yes, I love it. I love it. That's way too difficult a question for me. I'm sorry, I can't do it. So I think that there's a whole bunch of things going on there. I'll not remember to say them all here, but maybe some of this will make sense to you. You have probably had this experience when people have stepped across the threshold of an independent living center and recognized that things are not, as I like to say, business as usual. That sometimes in itself is enough empowerment for people. And then obviously there's others of us who need more support, and peer support is a way of reaching our personal and community goals. And it's very difficult to be involved in other aspects of the disability community if your basic needs are not being met. And we know that many, many people in our disability community do not yet have their basic needs met. And in fact, I was on the phone an hour or two ago with a group of people who run peer support groups for actually people who are blind, and they are very interested in moving on from peer support to advocacy, like you put it. What's the phrase that you used? The active advocacy army. And so it's maybe this sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but it's a bit like some of our other questions, even our quiz. It depends on the situation. Where are people? Are people having those basic needs met? Are they feeling the empowerment and pride of being in the disability community? And then it doesn't take very long to find out where the barriers are, the places where the disability community members are treated in the most tricky way. I always like to think of it as the big five: education, employment, healthcare, housing, transportation. Those are the issues that impact all of us in the cross-disability community, and to some degree or another. You know, the stories might be different, our personal stories are different, but those are the issues.
This is Ken. I like the question, and that'll be our next seminar. But one of the things that I was thinking about people who I provided some peer support to, that I get my own kind of little satisfaction from, is that when their advocacy is realized, and it may not be you know, that army where everyone is changing the Disability Integration Act or something like that, but it may be as small as, you know what, I can talk to my parents about this, or I can now. One of the things I remember was a gentleman who happened to be blind that told me that he was able to go out to his mailbox, and for me, I didn't think that was a big deal because I went to my mailbox every day, but for him, it was a liberating experience to be able to go to his mailbox and get his own mail. So the advocating army could be just that. It can be giving person support to open their front door and step out.
What a great answer. Thank you. Let's go ahead to the phone.
Hi, this is Susie Malloy. Several factors come to my mind regarding peers. Is what we're talking about when we refer to peer counseling actually, more truly, is it ex-peer counseling? The reasons I think that are that if we were really peers, one of us would not have a job. We would both be in similar socioeconomic circumstances. If we're meeting about issues that have to do with our medications or some other kind of specific issue that has to do with our disability, then I don't think that's the same as being a peer in the way that we usually think of it in independent living. For example, if I'm a peer counselor for an independent living center, I can get fired, I can get promoted, and then what's happened to that peer relationship that I thought I had? I'm gone, or the other person is gone. Those of us who are peer counselors don't reveal company secrets, like my executive director is a rat, or who's dating whom on the staff, or things like that. It's just not done. We need to have professional behavior and expectations of ourselves and our colleagues, but that isn't what real peers would do. And sometimes when some some agencies are more strict about this than other agencies, but one of the ILCs I work for had me keep track of the timing of the length of time of the discussion in 15-minute increments. And it felt to me like the agency would have liked it better if I had more 15-minute increments with more different people so that my stats would look better. And that bothered me. It doesn't feel like something a real peer would do. As long as I'm keeping track of our conversation and you're not, then I'm really acting in an ex-peer, current counselor position, I think. Also, if I'm the peer at the agency, my job is a coveted position, both because I'm probably getting a paycheck and because it speaks to my having the stamina and flexibility and social skills to have a job. And that's not necessarily peer-like. And if I'm the peer whose peer counselor has been chosen for me or set up for me, who's getting chosen? Like, what is it about the other person who's ostensibly my peer that made us seem like we'd have something to talk about? I don't know how to trust evaluation from another person. And those are things I've noticed or been thinking about during our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for thinking about that. Those are all valid points, are they not? That those of us who work at Centers for Independent Living do have some privilege. You're quite right. But not all peer support that goes on at Centers for Independent Living is with staff. Different centers do it in different ways, of course. You're right. Ken, you had something you wanted to say here?
Oh, I was just listening to your statements, and I found a couple different things. One, like Linda said, here at Disability Link, all of our staff are trained for peer support. Many of our volunteers are trained as peer supporters. And then one of the things about this particular webinar, Linda and I thought as we were preparing it, we said, you know, the best way to do this, we thought, is actually doing it as if we were peer supporters. And we found, if you notice during the conversation, that is exactly has worked exactly like that. We've given out some information, but in turn, you've given us some information, and that's exactly what peer support is. We've given you some options. Hopefully you'll make some choices, and of course then we'll be responsible for the choices that we make. And that's what peer support does. We provide options to our peers. They will make some choices, and they will be responsible for the choices that they make. So in essence, you know, you guys are peer supporters, and we're supporting you guys, and you guys are supporting us. So, and we're lucky for that. And according to Mary, this will be archived so that we can go back and find out all the answers that you've given, because we haven't able to remember all of them. So I thank you guys.
And I think another answer to this is that's why we need to have training and conversations, because there is inherently some trickiness about providing peer support from an organization to a peer that's not an organization. Obviously, there's an imbalance right there. So that's why we work on these things, and we attempt to improve on them, improve on our skills all the time. It's part of our obligation, I think, if we're going to take on that peer support role, to receive training and work on our skills to be the best we can be. Because frankly, what else do we have? We have each other in the peer community, and we're not all the same, and we don't have the same experiences, but we've all experienced barriers. That's the point.
And again, going back to the beginning of the seminar, we had some particular ground rules, and you were talking about internal news that's in your organization that we don't share. It's not like peer support is not a gripe session. I think that's one of the criteria about anything. It's supporting the peer, and that's what we're obligated to do.
So thank you for all that, and thank you again. There's lots of comments. I'm not sure that I can keep up with them. Somebody asked, do you have to have a disability to be a peer supporter in a Center for Independent Living? Well, technically, yes. But obviously, there are some of us who work in centers who do not identify as having a disability. We can provide support. I'm not sure it's peer support in the same way.
Wonderful. And Rary says, at the core of being a good peer supporter is an admission of not being a know-it-all and a willingness to support a peer getting and learning what they need from anyone that could best help them, especially when expertise is needed in areas like gaining employment. And Stephanie has another one of those questions, Ken and Linda, that I feel like could take a whole other webinar. But what about peer support for folks who say they want to affect change in their lives, but their behaviors over time do not seem to support that? And then she just caveats that she may not have worded that quite right, but she just wanted to ask it.
This is Ken, and not trying to seem like a know-it-all because I know so little. One of the things my mom used to tell me, what I do not know could make a whole new world. I said, that's a lot of stuff. Anyway, so remember, it's that you're as a peer supporter, you're giving options, you're giving choices, you're giving information, and for people to make choices. And even though I might say I want to change the world, and my choices may not seem like that's happening, again, that's my choice. And I have to be responsible for those choices. It's not the peer supporter that's responsible for those choices. And so if there doesn't seem like their actions are moving, sometimes it's okay. You keep providing choices, you keep providing options, and remember, they are the ones that's the expert of their lives, not necessarily us. There may be things we would think that they could or might want to do, but they are responsible for their own decisions.
Right. Our satisfaction or happiness is not reliant on the outcome of our peers' actions. Our responsibility is to be the best peer supporter that we can be. Just like we said, we're not experts. We don't know everything about everything. We sometimes have to go and find out information, and it's about a particular need. But we provide information and experiences and encouragement and support, and then it is up to our peers. That's independent living. It's tricky to live with. I'm sure I've missed some of the questions that have come up, Mary. Is there something that we should be addressing?
You know, Linda, we're getting close already to the end. Why don't you go ahead and move forward, and I'll kind of hold the spot here. I'll kind of let you kind of wrap up, and then we'll use the last 5 minutes.
Oh, my goodness me, yes. I'm seeing the time. Having such a good time. Okay, so I'm actually going to, did I pass by we're going to conclusions? Right. I went past the scenario that we might have had. We'll do that some other time if you invite us. Okay, so here we are in our conclusion, just saying some of the things that perhaps you've already tried to say. We're not experts in peer support, just in how we undertake the peer support at Disability Link and what we've learned in conversation with others, such as yourselves. And this is an IL conversation, not everything in the world there is to know about peer support. We've got how many people? More than 120 people in this conversation. There's way more experience than we've had time to dissect for this. What I would say that quality peer support does require training. It does require follow-up practice support time and energy. It's not just something that happens. Again, we'll say that peer support is mutually beneficial. Both the peer supporter and the peer learn from the experience, which is one of the lovely things about it. And then finally, we want to acknowledge that there is not just one way to undertake peer support. It can happen in many, many different forms, And so I have a couple of slides of resources in case any of this is interesting to you, how to contact us, how to find that movie with the clip about Donnie's story, and then some of the great stuff that's available through Nickel and through ILRU. Obviously some really wonderful stuff. I'd expect people to enjoy any of those things if they wanted more attention, or probably you've already had plenty of experience with it. I'll just keep moving. I'll leave it on our contact information there at the end. If you want to take a note of that, it would be lovely. You can obviously get the information from April, the recording and the downloaded slides if any of this information is interesting to you.
Excellent. Just a couple more things here from the chat. Minion Bob, which I love, he says, or they say, sometimes those who we provide peer support to do make the wrong choices. Yet even as a peer supporter, we cannot take responsibility for their choices, whether consumer or colleague. And Alexander kind of doubles it and says, that's one of the most important pieces of IL to me, is the freedom to make those choices, wherever that outcome leads. And I'll just add, as Mary, that's one of my favorite, I think, IL philosophy terms, and it's dignity of risk, for sure.
And because of those things, I think that's why these conversations are important, that we can remind one another and support each other that we are not responsible for the outcome of our peers' decisions. We're responsible for doing the best job we can in terms of peer support, offering those choices and options and encouragement and resources and the opportunity for people to make their own choices and outcome.
This is Ken. This is I appreciate the fact that we have over 130 different individuals or groups that are participating in this peer support session, because, like I said earlier, this is peer support for us, and I hope it's peer support for you as well. It's exchanging of ideas and getting some new ones and confirming some old ones. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the support and encouragement from some of these comments. Thank you.
I just wanted to add again, this is Mary, just the wonderful amount of support going on in the chat box. I skipped over a few of the questions because we had participants within the chat box answering them. And
awesome.
I know. I'm just so impressed, and I want to let folks know again that we will have this available as it was recorded. You can look through the chats and everything, and it will be on our website. If you give me like a half an hour, it will be there. And I did pop that in the chat box, and it's www.april-rural.org, and it'll be under the IL Conversations tab. And I just wanted to say, as folks are typing in, thank you so much to Linda and Ken agreeing to lead this conversation. I feel like I learned so much as well. And don't be surprised if April decides to take some of these beautiful nuggets happening in the chat box and on the transcripts, and we might come out with an FAQ or some tools. I just feel like this was too good just to leave here. And we, and again, we do have just a couple of minutes left, and so if anybody has those last-minute questions or comments, you can type them in or press *#, and we'll open up your phone for us. And if not, thank you all for always you're hanging in there with us, and please don't forget to evaluate the conversation. You can, on this slide, you can actually click it, I think, right from your computer and go to the eval. This is how fantastic technology is these days.
Thank you for being able to work this great technology, Mary and Sierra. Fantastic that you can do it. Makes us sound good, doesn't it?
Thank you all again, and I guess I'm just checking. I don't see any questions. Oh, there are 2 folks on the phone lines. If you don't mind, just one more, one or 2 more. We'll go ahead to them.
Hello, this is April Meredith at Empower Tennessee in Middle Tennessee, and I just wanted to add that I think that peer support and being a peer is not just about addressing the barriers in people's lives, but also providing opportunities to celebrate the triumphs that people have in a related, shared life experience type of way, and also that even if we're not in the exact same stage in our journey as an individual with a disability, we can still be a peer. We all have our own paces and ways and styles of addressing life, the good and the bad, but that doesn't mean that we're not a peer. It just means that we may be on a different part of our journey in that experience.
Thank you, friend. That's 2 really good points. Appreciate it. We must do some more celebrating of our triumphs. Appreciate that.
Jerry Tony, Athens, Georgia. I want to say thank you. I really enjoyed the refresher.
Oh, nice to speak to you again. It's been a while since we've been in the same room, isn't it?
Yeah, quite a while.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Thank you for saying those nice things. Thank you for doing good peer support. Thank you for everybody who's interested in talking about peer support. Really appreciate it. I would say it again. This is what makes us Centers for Independent Living, that we provide this very important service